athletes, thank you for checking in today. Now, what we're going to be going through today is an awesome episode. What we are talking about specifically is the idea that everything works. No matter what you're doing when it comes to practice, you're going to get better, and I want to show you exactly why that is the case, as well as giving you sort of 4 or 5 really actionable tips that you can use to start leveling up your practice routine and making sure you get the most out of every second that you're practicing, and help you to realize that, hey, if you're doing nothing, well, maybe doing something is going to get you to where you want to go. And if you're already doing sort of 20 hours a week of practice, well, how can you make that better? So this episode's going to have something for everyone. There's lots of neuroscience, lots of scientific insights, and lots of really useful tips from expert performers. Hope to see you on the other side. And as always, keep interacting, keep training, and stay strong. Welcome to the Elite Athlete Blueprint podcast, the podcast that will give you all of the tools that you need to make sure that you can learn from the absolute best wisdom available on the topic of elite performance and spend the next 10 years putting in the 10,000 hours of work you need to achieve elite athletic performance. Alrighty guys, nice little short one today, but just wanted to really talk about the dirty little secret of elite athletes. And one thing I know that reigns true, no matter what level of elite athlete you are across any sport, this secret is absolutely true, no matter who you are. And sort of without sort of beating around the bush too much, let's dive straight in. That secret really is the fact that consistency is the key. Now, why? I mean, everyone talks about that. Everyone talks about consistency is the key. And I mean, it doesn't sound like I'm talking about anything new, but the reason why I say that is because really this is a key idea to get through athletes' heads. And this is something that I struggled with as a youth, and that a lot of players who aren't yet at an elite level and who aren't practicing as much as they should really don't get, and they don't understand. It's that, no matter what practice you're doing, whether it's mental practice, whether it's out there dribbling, whether it's getting out and just simply playing, no matter what it is that you're doing, you could be doing the worst training program in the world and you're still going to get better. The human body is an adaptive machine, and that's the reason why we are where we are as human beings in terms of natural evolution, and that's why humans are at the top of the food chain. You look at how far we've come since we first evolved as, sort of Neanderthals, and really human beings have evolved so much because of the capacity of our brains to adapt and to respond to things that we do in life. And that's why elite athletes exist. Elite athletes aren't born elite athletes. They become elite athletes over years and years of training, of years and years of shaping their brain to be able to do a certain thing really well. You look at people who are really skilled in any endeavor, whether they're out in the jungle and they're really skilled at making certain types of weapons and crafts and things like that, or they're an elite athlete who can shoot the basketball like Steph Curry. The key that has happened there is that they've developed these motor patterns and these neural patterns within their brain over years and years of playing and doing the same thing over and over again. And so the people in the jungle who, they learn how to make fire. And if you've ever tried to make fire, when you first try to make it, it is incredibly difficult. It's like damn near impossible. You're sitting there like twirling a stick. If you don't have a flint, you're kind of twisting the stick around enough to you create heat through friction. And if you first see someone doing that, no one who's never done it before will be able to do it on their first go. But what you see is someone who knows how to do it before you, and you learn how to do that over years. And so you get more and more proficient at the skill of being able to do that. And that is a really crude example, but the people who learn how to do that particular skill, they're not thinking about, wow, am I going to get better at this? They're not worried about the fact that they might not be developing optimally. They just simply understand there's a process of doing it that has been refined over years and years and years. And that is essentially how skill development started. And whether that process is optimal or not is another question entirely. But the reason why I bring that up is because, well, it's a really interesting insight into sort of seeing how things develop. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're going to get better at it. And so that is the fundamental message that I really want to get through And this is the thing that underscores the entire elite athlete blueprint. It really doesn't matter what it is that you're doing, as long as you're doing something first and foremost. Now, of course, we have the perfect training week. We have our recommendations for what you should be doing at different ages, and we understand through science that the human body develops differently depending on what age you're at. And so our whole blueprint is designed to set you up along the way. And this is how we work with the coaches through CLB, and this is how we work through my club at the Sydney Supersonics, and we ensure that we're giving you the optimal training program for your age. But if you don't have the resources to be able to work with an elite coach at this time, well, then what we wanted to do is give you the sort of framework that you needed and the understanding to be consistent and clean up the low-hanging fruit, do the basics. Obviously, if you're working with a coach, you're going to speed up your development because we can use principles of science and principles of experience to understand, what it is that you need to be doing to sort of optimize your growth depending on where you're at. And that really is always going to require a coach. Even me as a coach, I know that working with a coach is going to allow me to get better development just because of the simple fact that when we plan our own training, we at times forget things, and we usually don't devote all the resources necessary to be able to do that optimally. And that's just the simple fact of life. You speak to any elite coach in the world, and they will tell you the same thing, that when they get someone else to do their training for them, they're always going to get a better result. And it's just about keeping you accountable. We don't always like doing the things we don't like doing. We tend to work on our strengths. And, it can be hard to constantly test ourselves and keep ourselves accountable. We tend to fall back into the same habits and patterns. However, with the blueprint, you'll be able to recognize that, and depending on the amount of time you devote towards creating your training programs and tweaking things, then you might never ever need a coach ever again. You might find that it has everything you need, and you're able to progress yourself as well as you ever could. And obviously, we're going to be there to help you along the way. But really, the most important message is that being consistent and doing something is always going to get you better. Now, the differences between a program that is not quite ideal and a program that is more ideal sort of comes down to this idea that as human beings, we have limited energy and we only have a limited adaptive capacity. And so if you had all the time in the world and you were a professional athlete, then it might not matter as much, what kind of training you're doing and how effective it is, because if you're someone like Kobe Bryant, who apparently used to train for 6 hours a day, 6 days a week for 6 months out of the year, then you've got all the time in the world to really focus on the nitpicky little things and, practicing, I guess, in a less scientifically effective way, which was Kobe would just literally go out and just rep out the same thing over and over again in a block practice method, which has been proven that it is not always the most effective way to do it. And I mean, look, no offense to Kobe Bryant, he was one of the greatest players of our generation, and if not one of the most skilled, well-rounded players, if not the most skilled and well-rounded players to ever play the game. However, he did suffer some pretty horrendous injuries. He did have chronic knee pain. He did have a torn Achilles, which is really an overuse injury at someone at his level. He had, was known to play through pain and didn't really take a lot of time off. And unfortunately, he was blessed with a lot of genetic advantages. He wasn't the most athletic player in the league by any stretch of the imagination, but he was an incredible athlete. And his training may not have been the most optimal form of training to allow him to develop as quickly as possible. Now, at the time, load management wasn't as popular, and we can't really argue that, maybe you could have done better or whatever. It's more of just a philosophical point as to say, right, if you're trying to copy what Kobe Bryant did for his training, then chances are you're not going to have the time to be able to do that, nor will you have the genetics. Kobe Bryant was known to only sleep for 4 hours a night. And so the reason I raise that point is because I guess when looking at your own training and understanding that something's better than nothing, you look at what Kobe does, and I mean, he got remarkably better. And when we look at the science behind his training methods, they weren't always the most scientific, and yet it worked incredibly well. And so what we must understand is that no matter what you're doing, you're going to be improving. And fundamentally, when you know what it is that builds skills and what causes improvement, you understand that it's really mostly controlled by the brain. And so that's why it's so important to look after the brain as an athlete. and as anyone who wants to be skilled at anything. And if you don't look after the brain, then you're not going to develop as optimally as you could. Now, when we talk about the brain, anything that is associated with general intelligence, like studying, learning, reading, that's going to improve your brain in general, and it's going to improve the capacity of your brain to retain more knowledge and to become more skilled over time. And it's just the nature of using the brain and all around growing the amount of sort of neurons and white matter and grey matter that exists, so that you can actually improve your skilled performance. Now, that is one element to it. So we really would encourage that, that's how becoming smarter and more intelligent actually improves your basketball, because you're increasing the overall size of the cup that your brain can retain things with, and you'll start to find, there's different things from other fields that relate to basketball and skill development. Now, that's one element of it, and the other element is obviously the more you can replenish the brain. Like we all know what that point's like, where you've just trained so much and you feel like you're not performing the skill, like say shooting or dribbling, as well as you could. And what you're doing there is you're sort of depleting neurotransmitters and you're depleting the capacity of the brain. And so what's happening is it's sort of causing a bit of fatigue. And with that fatigue comes a depletion of resources, and that takes time to recover from it. So when you're really trying to look after your skill development, we must be looking after things that increase our capacity of our brain and are healthy, which is eating a lot of fats. I've got a whole article on this particular thing. There's more to it than just eating a lot of fats, but it's replenishing neurotransmitters, having enough amino acids, sleeping enough, and there's a whole series of things related directly to diet. And so a lot of basketball players will overlook, I don't need to be looking after my brain, like it doesn't have anything to do with my sport, I don't need to be intelligent. But I will say that it is the most fundamental thing that will speed up your skill development. And so that's why recovery is so important, because as you recover, you improve your brain and your ability to learn things and retain things. And so I guess going back to the original point, in that, by doing something, you're always going to improve. Like, what do I mean by something? Well, there's so many forms of something that you can do that are going to lead to improvements. And studies have shown that obviously physical practice is going to improve you to a certain amount, and there are different forms of physical practice that you can do. You can go through block practice, which is practicing the same skill over and over. There's sort of contextual practice, which is more related to the actual sporting skill of the game itself. If you haven't quite mastered the skill, then just simply repping out the skill in the way that you'll perform it is a great way to go about it. But obviously, you want to make sure that you're replicating the skill as close to how you would perform it in the game as possible. Now, there are certain things such as 2-ball basketball dribbling drills and tennis ball dribbling drills that are going to work on different elements of skilled performance, and it helps to drive you further towards what is known as the autonomous stage. So if you're using a tennis ball, for example, what that's doing is it's working on your decision-making capacity and your ability to handle multiple stimulus while sort of automatically, dribbling the basketball in one hand. And the same with the 2-ball drill. It's taking away your ability to consciously think about one thing and causing you to process multiple things at once. Now, those are some examples of some certain skill things that you can do that will improve your overall ability to perform a given skill in a game. And where that really comes into play is understanding, okay, it's not super specific, but it's causing my brain to get better at a particular area of the skill. And that's sort of like where it comes down to physical practice. And then the second component, and this is a component that I'm really excited about, particularly that it is during lockdown at the time of recording this, is this idea of mental practice. And there's so many elements to mental practice. Firstly, there's visualization, there's mindfulness, and I also like to say sort of film study and watching. And they all rely on sort of different neurological and sort of, I guess neurological is the best word, neuroscientific mechanisms. So really, firstly, visual practice and mental practice is just simply going through the skill that you're trying to perform in your head. And the best example for a basketball player would be the jump shot. And thinking about how you're performing that jump shot as you would in a game is going to allow your brain to replicate the exact motor patterns that are going to be activated when performing that skill in the physical reality. And this is why sort of our thoughts create actions, and our brain really can't tell the difference when we look at electrical myographic studies, EMG, of the brain. We see that the same brain area is activated when actually performing the skill as when we visualize it. And we all know what it feels like to go out and sort of see someone practicing something, or visualize a jump shot ourselves, and it genuinely feels like we're shooting the ball to an extent. And so that act of visually practicing, even if it's just 10, 20 reps, it's going to lead to an improvement. And what studies have shown is that up to 80% of the result of physically practicing can be achieved simply by mental practice, and it can be done in much less time. 10 or 20 reps of a mental rehearsal is going to allow you to gain significant amounts of skill performance. Now, the same thing can be said for actually watching clips. Now, when you watch a clip, there's a phenomenon known as subconscious mimicry, as well as mirror neurons. And when we watch someone doing something, our brain is the same concept as mental rehearsal. Our brain activates these mirror neurons, and it subconsciously starts to mimic the act that's being performed. And so our motor neurons will be activated, particularly if we're already skilled at this act. Say, if you're a jump shooter or a basketball player and you've watched Steph Curry shooting, then you're inherently going to be activating the same motor patterns that you would when shooting a jump shot, and you're going to start creating the muscle memory, as they call it, which is really just a motor program in your brain as to understand how to shoot the shot better. Now, that's the two elements of sort of mentally practicing skills. And then there's another element of film study, which is really more about visualizing. Well, I guess you could break that down into two things: film study and then visualizing how you would play in a game. And how you would play in the game is more about visualizing all of the aspects and how you would perform. And so you run through the sets that you would run, you practice seeing the crowd there, you practice hitting big shots, and that's going to improve your skill, but it's also going to improve your ability to deal with the situation and all of the factors involved when you get on the court. And then the other element is simply watching those game films and recognizing different scenarios that you're going to be seeing and allowing yourself to not get flustered when you're on the floor. Like the only way we get better at, say, playing the point guard position is understanding the different tendencies that typically happen. And any elite professional player will tell you they watch a lot of film. LeBron James has been said as, I don't necessarily feel like I play the game of basketball as much anymore. I feel like I think the game a lot more than I actually play it. And you can see in his game, he's always one step ahead of the competition. And so that is what the benefits of watching a lot of film can do for you. And there was a separate article and a really simple guide as to watch film as a junior player that I've written, and so I will link that in. But really, a critical component to all of it is that film study. And then finally, as I touched on, is the mindfulness piece. Now, mindfulness is really just about, it's another area entirely. It's learning how to relax and learning how to shut out the noise of the sympathetic system and just allowing your body to go through its automatic processes. The human body is an incredibly intelligent machine that's doing millions, if not billions of things, if not trillions of things at once. And we don't even have to think about it. Rarely we have to think about breathing and I think about all of the physiological processes and the bacteria that makes up our gut and everything that makes up our body. And we're not even thinking about any of that. And so mindfulness really allows us to sort of shut out all of the thoughts that we have and just put our body on autopilot. And that is exactly how to perform a skilled repetition in the most effective way. Once we've developed a skill, thinking about that skill is not going to get us any better at it. And in fact, when we think about performing a skill, we actually interrupt the optimal motor patterns to perform that skill once we've got it refined, and we're not going to perform it as optimally as we can. And there's been a bunch of research on this. So practicing mindfulness just helps you to shut out the mental side of things that can affect your performance, and really it allows you to perform optimally and just play freely and play in the best way. It's like the flow state. The best athletes aren't thinking about what they're doing when they're playing, they're simply just playing. And that's really what mindfulness and meditation helps us to cultivate, along with a whole bunch of other things to do with optimal recovery, restoration of physical systems, and just really around allowing us to be less stressed and allowing our body and brain to replenish. And so without mindfulness, really we can't recover as optimally as we can. And like anything in life, we have to rest at sometimes, and we have to go hard at sometimes. And so that's really what the power of mindfulness is. So I just wanted to run through this because I wanted to show people that when they do something, some form of practice, they're going to be getting so much better, no matter what it is. And there's different levels of practice and varying things that they can do that are going to improve different things. But the most important message to walk away with this from is, it might seem overwhelming, all these ideas of mindfulness and different types of training and mental practice and film study. The most important thing is, if you're not doing something every single day related to basketball and you want to be the best player that you can be, start somewhere. Even if it's just 10 minutes of dribbling in your backyard, even if you can't get to a basketball or a hoop or a space to bounce the ball, watch film, start playing in your mind, start doing all the things that you love doing on the court in your head, and I guarantee you will get better to an extent. And then the person who gets the best is the person who can combine all of the factors that I've just talked about in the best way possible. Fortunately, we've sort of given you a head start on that with the blueprint. We've got a program, we've got a perfect training week that is catered to all different levels, and we're going to continue expanding on that over time. If you want to check that out, simply click the link, join up to the program. It's 30 days for free to begin with. If you want something even more specific than that, we can work with you as a coach. We can plug you in with the coaches network that we have. And really, 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 we wanted to share these secrets of elite athletes with you and sort of decode and democratize the art of elite athletic performance, because for too long secrets have been guarded, and I had to spend 10 years studying, researching, and going to university to learn these things, and I'm really keen to share it with the athletes of the future.